So hello everyone, my name is Alberto. I work for Cambridge Assessment English as an assessment services manager for the Americas. I have been working with Cambridge for 5 years now, a bit more than 5 years. And I've known Michigan for a long time, and it's such a pleasure to be joining forces with Michigan to talk about this great exam that we are going to introduce to you in this talk. So enjoy the webinar by all means. Thank you, Fernando.
Great, thank you. And it's a pleasure, an honor to join efforts with you in working on this session together, Alberto. I'm Fernando Fleurquin. I know many of you, and I see many familiar names who have participated in other sessions, or we've been in touch for different reasons over, like, I don't know how many years I've been in the field so far, over 30 something. I'm the Director of Marketing, Communications, and Stakeholder Relations with Michigan Language Assessment. So with that, we'll get started. You have a chat section where you can post where you're from and any other comments you want to share with the rest of the audience today. And there's a question and answer section at the bottom as well that you can use to post questions, and we'll try to address those either throughout the presentation or mostly at the end. We will have some time at the end to answer questions. See Marcos joining us from Paraguay. Thank you, Marcos. So what are we doing, Alberto and I together? Michigan Language Assessment is a collaboration between the University of Michigan and Cambridge Assessment English. That's why we've been working together throughout, since 2010, actually, when we joined forces in that case and created Michigan Language Assessment as this not-for-profit organization. But especially during the last year, with all the challenges that we've had and the new strategies that we had to develop, we worked very closely with the Cambridge team, especially from all the Americas, but we're working with other Cambridge Assessment English colleagues from different regions in the world as well. So we're trying to offer better solutions, to offer a more complete portfolio of different kinds of assessments to all your learners and the schools, administrators, and the stakeholders that work with you, so that you're better equipped to serve their needs. We have a couple of polls that we prepared to know a little more about you. So CJ will open the polls. The first one is about what has happened recently with your students. What percentage of your teenage student population took English proficiency tests during this last year? Kind of the majority of those, more than 76 to 100%, or 50 to 75%, 25 to 50%, less than 25%. Nobody took an exam at all. So it seems that many were canceled. The majority, what it's leading so far is 0%, and with that, less than 25%.
Yeah.
The next question after this one is, what levels of English proficiency do your teenage students reach by age 15? And I don't know if you're familiar, everybody's familiar with the Common European Framework of References. A1 and A2 are beginning level, beginning and high beginning. B1 and B2 are kind of intermediate and high intermediate. And after that, there are other more advanced levels. We're mainly focusing on the lower scale at this point, and that's why we have those two. So the majority of your students are of the A2, B1, and some of the B2 level. So we're sharing the results. We got the majority of those, the percentage of students that took English proficiency exams, like probably less than a quarter of your students. Is that what you've seen, Alberto, as well?
Yes, that's very similar to what we've seen here in Brazil and in some other countries in the Americas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's
there is a good thing about the level, like the levels that students reach. B1 is very good. I mean, it's a very good target.
It's aligned with many standards across the regions, different countries that have established certain expectations, or schools that have their own institutional requirements or expectations. So it's good to know that you're aiming at those kind of high intermediate or B1 or B2 or higher levels. That's great. We have one more question, another poll that will be coming up right after this one, to learn a little more about the challenges that you've had in relation to your English language programs. Guess many of you we know about many of you who are teaching, others are administrators also within your programs, coordinators working on making decisions about your programs. So what were some of the challenges that you faced? Students in the same class have varying levels of English proficiency, and you have to accommodate that in some way, especially thinking about assessment purposes. Or you want to administer English exams, but there are many restrictions, obviously, for administration of in-person exams. Giving everybody a certificate in some way so that they show their achievement in English after a very hard year, especially. And giving feedback on students' performance, that's another challenge that some of you mentioned here. And you want to improve your academic curriculum based on some of the results of those external exams. So far, the great majority, obviously, has been struggling with the restrictions to administer in-person exams. And that's why in the previous poll, the majority of the exams were canceled. But also the varying levels of English proficiency is something important that we have to face in some way and address within our classrooms and different contexts. And probably it was this increased during this year in some way with the different approach to learning and the different limitations that they had, and the I don't know about your experience, direct experience, Alberto, with
very similar. Lots of uncertainty with exams being scheduled and then they had to be canceled or rescheduled because of this uncertain scenario, unfortunately. And that, I mean, the expectations of levels as well have been quite mixed because of the different experiences students go through. Some have more access than others to certain devices, environments, etc.
And their own ways of learning in a way, and that now they're a little more on their own in a way, because they have to manage with their own styles and their own preferences. So it's still a challenge that we have to consider. That's great. Thank you for all your responses. If we can move to the next slide, then we'll pick up from there. And I'm sure from what we've seen with our interactions with the different teachers, coordinators, school owners, administrators, different groups of stakeholders that we've been in touch recently, we've noticed the need for a more flexible, more modern assessment solution that shows that all learners can succeed, that everybody's kind of showing that progress, that is easily integrated into your own curriculum. So like something easy for teachers to use that provides strong academic support for schools and that further supports students' learning in a way. So this one of the exam that we're talking about in particular is MET Go, that you might have heard about from all the different communications that we've had with all our stakeholders. And it's launched as a digital exam starting this month in April. We're beginning with the first administrations now, we already started with reservations for the exam, and we're starting with administrations of the digital version. I think the first one is coming up in a couple of days now. So at a very kind of broad overview, MET Go is designed mainly for teenagers, upper primary, middle school students, lower secondary levels, sometimes depending on different countries and how the educational system is organized. It's aiming at A1 up to B1 levels of English proficiency, like the very beginning up to kind of a low intermediate. It tests all 4 skills, but speaking is optional. So if you want to assess only listening, reading, and writing, and you want to leave speaking out, so far I don't think that we've had many requests for 3-skill MET Go. the majority of the countries are really working on a more integrated approach, assessing all 4 skills. But this was one of the original requests when we started developing the exam, to have that flexibility. And now it's also available not only as a paper and pencil test, but as a digital version. The best thing that I like about the exam is that it provides a personalized report for all test takers. So here you have a few highlights of the main features, how MET Go and now the digital version can support test takers and schools as well. We mentioned some of those already, like the age levels or school. Just one second. Yeah, the levels of the CEFR, the Common European Framework. It's a multi-level exam, so the same exam is taken by a group of students that can have varying levels of English proficiency. And that's why it provides that additional flexibility in a way. Everybody gets some kind of certification of their level of proficiency by the different skills with a personalized report. That's why it has that personalized feedback there. And we'll look at a little about the familiar tasks now in a minute. But the important thing is that everybody gets a certificate, a score report with a certificate showing their accomplishments. And for schools, it's also as a result of being a multi-level exam, it's a very inclusive solution, especially for mixed ability classes, as you were describing previously as one of your challenges. It's flexible as well for schools because you can choose your own date together with the test center that will be administering the exam for you. Results are usually within 2 weeks. You can be administered either at home or in a test center, but mostly at home at this point because that's the main need nowadays. And it will be, as we will discuss in a minute, very easily integrated into your curriculum. It's very easy to see the connections between any communicative curriculum that most of you follow in most of the cases that we're familiar with already to integrate MET Go. And of course, it's backed by the University of Michigan Cambridge Assessment English. We have several resources that are available. Have you used any of these, Alberto, with your materials and things?
Yes, I would like to say something about the resources because, you know, when we are preparing for an exam, having, for example, a sample test is a very good resource to use in class, but it's only good if you have other techniques to help students develop those skills. And I found great ideas by going to the resources library here on the Michigan website.
Great, and thank you, CJ. She just shared the link to that particular article with different resources that we used to describe some of the things that we're talking about today. But those are available on the website, and they're very useful things just to think about. If we look at one of those, one of the things that we prepared was this scope and sequence chart. We got questions from different teachers and different schools, how they can think about in order to learn more about the exam and the contents and how, since it's multi-level and that we're not that familiar with the format of the exam and how many levels it covers, we prepared this chart that shows each of the different sections of the test for the skill and the subsections, the sub-skills or the different parts that each section contains. In this case, you're only looking at the listening section and parts 1, 2, and 3 out of 5. It has different can-do statements from CEFR describing what is expected at that level in relation to the tasks that we're proposing for the exam in itself. And then on the green side of a chart, it has example items that illustrate that particular section and how those can-do statements are implemented in some way. So that's a very visual and or clear organization of the content of the exam and how the different sections cover different sub-skills that can help you make a decision. If you go on, yeah, go ahead.
Considering that this is a multi-level test, this is really good. It's a very good support for teachers in terms of assessment, looking at the different descriptors and how to provide feedback to learners and establish goals in terms of what learners need to improve and where they are doing well.
Mm-hmm. Great. If you go on to the next one with this scope and sequence chart, one of the things that we've encouraged teachers to do is to sort of compare your textbook, the materials that you're using, that scope and sequence of the content, grammar, vocabulary, skills, and what is expected during this year with the scope and sequence for MET Go. So that can give you an idea in terms of what to expect and how to connect the two for your particular case in a very easy way. It wouldn't take you more than half an hour really to evaluate the two in some way and make decisions about when you can integrate the exam into your curriculum, when you can start preparing for the exam, when you can make connections like, so this activity in this unit that we're already practicing can help you with the preparation for the exam as well, without having to do anything special for the preparation for the exam in itself. Right. Something else that is listed there, and here's just a few examples, are some of the topics or categories that are used within the exam. So raise your hand or say something or to tell us if any of these topics are familiar to your students, your teenage students from A1 up to B1 levels. I'm aware that this might be over a range of different classes, and it's not just like the same students in the same class. Probably you won't have A1 and B1 students, but you might have students that in terms of different skills, they are really kind of stronger or need more work and might be at very different levels in terms of their performance. So I'm sure that all these topics are included in most of your classes in one way or another: animals, daily life, educational or academic situations, entertainment, family life, food, drink, housing. Those are all topics that are usually appropriate for students at this age group, at this level in particular, and for the regions where we are usually referring to their particular contexts. You can see some of those, the rest of the topics that are mentioned in the same scope and sequence guide that was mentioned, that's linked there. So this is an example that we did for Shape It. This is one textbook that Cambridge University Press was launched last year. And we analyzed some of those different sections of the test based on the content, and we identified several examples for each of those, of the different parts of the test, how they are reflected within that particular textbook, not just to endorse Shape It in particular, but that was one of the examples that we were working on together with Cambridge University Press on this. That's something that you can do yourselves with your own curriculum, with the materials or the combination of materials that you're working on, which activities are similar in terms of the format, in terms of the content, the topics that are being discussed, or the skills that are being practiced in each case, so that you can have a clear idea of the progression throughout the year or throughout your own academic program, how MET Go is reflected in terms of what you're doing in class. So to continue with a specific example and how the different skills are integrated in, like this assessment and learning and teaching are all part of a big, all the work that we do, but it's part of all of the same circle in a way. And we just started with some examples from listening. We'll start with the listening section of the test, giving you an overview of different areas that are covered and how it's integrated. It can be easily integrated into your academic programs. The digital exam, the first section of the test will be, the students will start with writing, and then they will continue with listening, reading, and they will finish with speaking if they are planning to take a 4 skills test. But for this webinar in particular, so the listening section of MET Go has 5 parts. It takes 30 minutes. The audio will be played twice, so students don't need to feel anxious about, oh, I missed it, or it's something that will be more natural as happening in the class at this level in particular. There are different, and so the tasks are designed knowing that the audio will be played twice as well. You can see some of the skills that are covered, the listening sub-skills that are covered in the test, understanding and identifying concrete and familiar words from a short description, understanding main ideas, understanding details from dialogues, announcements, understanding the speaker's purpose, attitudes, short WH and yes/no questions, or either general, global ideas, details, key words mentioned in certain contexts. And here you have short description of each of the 5 parts. The first one is identifying people in a picture based on short descriptions, answering response to some items, answering questions about a short conversation that are that include several illustrations, longer conversations, and then a short announcement in both sections of the last 2 sections with several questions about the same. So from what you can see there are many activities that are linked in some way. So they are contextualized. There's a lot of visual information that helps them understand. It's more presented like a textbook in a way, rather than only an exam. It's colorful, it's attractive in that sense. That's why it was designed especially for teenagers with kind of their short attention span in a way. But how to help them focus on a task and not just jump from one item to another, completely changing the context, or they stay within a certain activity that's contextualized based on a visual that is provided there, and that helps them stay focused on that topic in particular. So one of the activities that we were mentioning here was related about a short announcement. This is from one of the sections, and we're mainly describing a few ideas to do. If you're using that activity to practice listening, not to use the test itself, but it's to help students develop, using just the audio example here or how it's presented in the exam, how this could be also useful for a learning activity and to develop listening tasks. You can start with several pre-listening activities, and I'm sure you will come up with many more examples of very creative lesson plans if we had time to work with all of you more collaboratively here. Here are a few possible pre-listening tasks. You can activate students' background knowledge, like exploring this picture. It's kind of very abstract, but what is it, or what do they think this might be about? Or they can start, you can ask them to describe chairs, and somebody has to guess which one they're describing. That can be kind of a higher level task probably. They're all chairs with different shapes and characteristics that they would have to identify in order. Maybe if you wanted to make it even harder, you can tell them that they cannot use any colors in their descriptions. So if once they got into that context in some way, you can ask them to sort of predict what they think that this kind of announcement can be about. They know that the activity will be about an announcement or a short announcement, but they still don't know what it is about. And this visual provides that kind of context. If you tell them next that, hold on a second, go back to the previous one. And if you tell them next that this is going to be about a field trip, that can give them a little more input in order to make a decision about what they need to discuss in relation to that. What kind of field trip do you think that it might be? If it involves so many chairs, it's going to be mostly about a furniture factory. So you can brainstorm some vocabulary that they might need to know about it, or they can activate other ideas related to that. So they are really focused on by the time they get to the listening activity itself, they have a lot of background information already. They have a linguistic background, the contextual background to understand what they're going to be paying attention to. So for the activities that you can provide, you can propose to students while they're listening to that section, again, for teaching purposes, not during the test. You're not going to interrupt the test to do all this. But if you're using that the audio sample or that listening activity, this is just an example. They will need to answer main ideas, like where will the class go? How are they getting there? remember that this was an announcement. It's a teacher talking to students about going on a field trip to a furniture factory, and she describes what they need to do when they get there. Understanding some details. There are some things that the teacher describes about what they have to do when they go home. Understanding some keywords. I wrote a sentence with a couple of blanks to help them focus on those particular things. Can you guess what those words are? You can write about the blank and what the blank were doing. You can write your words in the chat if you want. I want to play a little. And then we need to know to see if they understood who's talking, what the purpose of the announcement is, all that. It's a very short announcement, really, so it's not really going to take a lot of time. One of the questions from the test here is the one that you have under the picture here. What is the woman mostly talking about? The woman is really the teacher. So, but the item does not really reveal that is the teacher. So, because that's something else that we'll have to answer later. They have to understand that this is a teacher talking to her students. New classroom furniture, something she saw on a trip, or today's class activity. So the next slide, these are other possible post-listening activities. And you can reconstruct the text. It can be done in pairs or as an information gap activity in different ways. You have different things there. That's a whole script, and we're not going to work on that. And on the other side, you have other possible ideas depending on your lesson plan and the focus of your class. Talking about a field trip, describe, and you can tell them exactly what you would like them to work on. Or a few guiding questions. What would you like to know about the factory? Or what questions would you like to ask when you visit the factory, supposing that you're actually going there? Or visit a website of a furniture factory and write a brief report with giving them a few questions to make sure that everybody's really paying attention to certain areas. So these are some ideas how the same input can be used, how the same kind of audio file or the same input that they are getting, in this case as a short announcement for a test, can be used for teaching purposes and help students develop listening skills. Go on to the next one. And it's back to you now.
Yes. Fernando, these are great ideas, and I really like the suggestions you gave here for the ideas for after listening. One thing I like doing as well with post-listening activities is using the script and the audio to highlight features of pronunciation, which is something we can help the students to identify certain intonation patterns or word stress or connected speech. So there's lots that we can do with the post-listening activities using the tape script. It can be a very, very useful resource. So great ideas. Now I'm going to talk about this component, the reading component. Well, MET Go Digital in the reading part, it has 2 parts with 30 multiple choice questions, and it lasts 30 minutes in total. So there are lots of skills that are assessed in this component. So we can see here word and phrase level grammar, understanding general topic specific vocabulary. Fernando gave us a list of topics here, some of the topics that students will be dealing with in the exam and in preparation for the exam as well. Lots of those topics are already in the students' course materials. So understanding attitude or opinion, understanding details, identifying reference, interpreting dialogues, and it has 2 main parts. The first part has a list of thematically linked grammar and vocabulary items, so that focuses on grammar and vocabulary within a theme, so you don't have a reading text to read, but you have to interpret the sentences in order to come up with the right answer. And for part 2, you have some texts. You have both narrative and informational texts in the exam. So the tasks are varied so that students can demonstrate that they have reading skills from the different levels of the CEFR. And then we can have a better picture of the student according to how much they can demonstrate on the day of the exam, right? So what we are doing here is we are sharing some ideas with you that can be used in the classroom. And before I talk about some of the ideas for the reading paper, I always like to drawing our attention as teachers to two different moments with those resources. One moment is when the students are sitting the exam, that is, they're actually being assessed. So they don't have all the time in the world to actually go through a number of phases and get feedback as they go along. They have to sit the exam, they have to demonstrate, they develop those skills at a certain within a certain amount of time, right? However, in preparation for the exam, before they sit the exam, we can make use of the items in the exam and gradually help the students develop those skills. So we are going to talk about resources from part 2, narrative and informational text from the reading paper, with some ideas that you can use in the classroom. So one type of informational text that students will find in the reading paper is the this type here, which is a flyer. So one of the things that we teachers can do is to teach the word flyer in case students don't know and the different spelling patterns. And then we can actually focus on certain concepts, like for example, comparing a flyer with a poster and where the students see flyers, for example, in their environment. And then they can consider the different purposes the flyers serve, right? And then we can also provide context for the activity. Students look at the flyer and decide where they can see them, who the reader of those messages would be, and do they show interest when they receive flyers, for example, or when they see flyers in social media, which is something that happens as well when people advertise events, activities, and services as well. And then we can do a number of activities for specific reading skills like skimming and scanning. So we can practice skimming and scanning by showing the flyer, and then we hide the flyer again and ask the students what they noticed. You may want to show the flyer a second time for a few more seconds and get the students the opportunity to read bit by bit. And then before the students read for details, they can predict what they will read based on the images they saw during those seconds. You can focus on certain keywords that drew their attention, the format, and that can be also a good way of leading the students to a writing activity later, right, when they can produce flyers for different purposes. And then we can do the actual reading for information, so they can look at the flyer and then they can kind of scan the flyer for specific information such as time, place, dates, activities, etc. That can be done with more or less time. That would depend on how much support the students would need. And for every stage, it's always good to provide some feedback to ensure that students are getting the confidence to demonstrate that they're reading quickly, right? And then we can do some comprehension questions. I have some examples here. These are the exam items. The exam items don't come like this covered. They come with a question and multiple choice options. Students have to choose the right option. This is in the exam, but in the classroom, what we can do is we can grade the challenge to make the task more or less challenging. And one way of doing so is once we have done all the previous steps that I mentioned, we can look at the exam questions there, get the students to give the students the opportunity to go to the flyer and try to answer those questions without looking at the options. That is one possibility. And then once they have gone through the questions, you can give them the options, and then you can uncover the options, and then they do the actual exam task in the classroom. But this is just to give them an idea, a concrete idea of the process of reading, which is very important. And I mean, if we are teaching remotely, like many of the teachers are doing at the moment, you can do the virtual post-it to cover the answers. You can get an image of a post-it from the internet and add to your teaching materials if you're teaching remotely. Or when you resume classes to face-to-face, then you can use real post-its. So this is one idea to focus on reading strategies, right? Now, in terms of narrative texts, we have some ideas to share with you as well. So students have to read two stories in the in part two. I've got here one thing that we can do with narrative texts to develop, to kind of raise students' interest in something that they are going to read about. So I have here some images that I got from the internet, and then we can use those images. We can give those images a sequence to kind of elicit ideas, somehow get the students to predict or anticipate what kind of stories they will be reading in a moment. So here is a task for you. I'm going to ask you to use the chat. By looking at the pictures here, can you tell the story in the picture in one sentence? Go to the chat
One
and
sentence,
try.
are you sure?
One sentence, yes. I mean, one or two sentences, and then you get the whole story that I'm trying to tell by using those pictures here. We have the numbers here to sequence the story. So I'm going to go to the chat, Fernando, to see some of the ideas from the audience. Okay, let's see who can write a sentence quickly telling the story. The man flying to work. Okay, that could be a possibility. Yeah, any other ideas? Thank you, Richard, for your suggestion. We can see, I can kind of prompt some more ideas here. We can see a kind of bus, which is a very specific type of bus. It's not an ordinary bus. It's a very specific one. Okay, that's my daily routine. And that has been my daily routine for years as a teacher. Plus, as I started teaching before internet and before digital materials, I used to carry a lot of weight with all the physical resources I used to in my teaching. Yeah, that's almost right, Riaz. Thank you for your contribution. So we can kind of get the students to consider the sequence in the story, and then we can see that someone is running here, probably to try and catch the bus. And then this boy here is going to school, and apparently the boy came to school, right? So we can then ask some questions about it, about the character. Did the boy get to school? Was he early or late? And then what expression, if the boy was running to catch the bus and he managed to get to school, what expression can you say to complete this sentence? He got to school. And then let me see if anyone can take the risk and give us the answer in the chat. So if the boy was running to catch the bus was about to depart, but even then the boy got to school. How can we complete this sentence? He got to school in time. Well done, Adriana. Thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah, the boy got to school just in time. So we can use the images to teach new language, new lexis. Here we have an expression, a very important expression, which happens to be the title of the story in one of the texts in the exam. So once you have worked with the context of the story, students can personalize by thinking of a moment when they said or when they could have said just in time, and then they can describe experiences and start guessing what they will find in terms of experiences in the text, and decide, predict whether the writer had a good or a bad experience by looking at the title, the image, and the first lines of the story. Then, in 40 seconds, they can look at the text and decide what the answer will be for many of those things, like things like who wrote the text, topic areas, how the text is organized, etc. And if it, I mean, the predictions were correct or not. And then you can use the exam questions again. They look at the text, they have to say, what's the story about? And try and answer the questions. Once they have come up with the answers or anticipated the answers, you can then show the options and see if they got the answers right. Again, showing the students the process, the reading process, our brains go through when we are reading. The only difference is this happens very, very quickly in real life in our own language, right? Same for writing. We have some ideas here to share with you. But before we talk about the ideas, the writing paper, the writing component of MET Go Digital has 3 parts, 30 minutes in total with color illustrations to accompany the prompts. So you have a number of skills that are assessed through the writing tasks. So things like describing a sequential narration of familiar events, a personal experience, personal preference or opinion, expressing ideas, the use of cohesive devices to give a logical progression to ideas, correct conventions for spelling, punctuation, capitalization. And this paper has 3 parts, and each part has a specific degree of challenge, right? We start with the shortest text to be produced up to the longest text. So we have part 1, where the students tell a story, a very short story, and they have a comic strip to base the story on. They describe a personal experience, and part 3, they write a personal preference or opinion in 2 paragraphs. So in a nutshell, these are the 3 parts of the writing paper, the 3 tasks the students have to complete. You will notice in the bold types here, part 1, students write 20 words or more, including describing the story, including all the 3 images. Part 2, they write at least 1 paragraph. Part 3, they write at least 2 paragraphs. So you see there are degrees of challenge here, different lengths of texts to make sure students demonstrate their abilities as much as they can. Right? In terms of assessment, we are talking about an exam that is multi-level. There are many descriptors that are taken into consideration that students are expected to demonstrate in this test. So just to give you an idea, I've got the scope and sequence document that Fernando introduced at the beginning of this webinar. For part 1 of the writing paper, you can see, for example, that there are descriptors related to the CEFR level A1, CEFR level A2. So a good candidate doing part 1 will probably demonstrate the competencies in the second column here, CEFR level A2. And then when we look at part 2, students have to produce more, at least 1 paragraph, which means this will give them scope to demonstrate a number of competencies from levels A2 and B1 already. So a good candidate will demonstrate a number of competencies here in the 3rd blue column, level B1. And part 3, which is a lot more challenging. It gives the students a lot of scope to produce language and hopefully demonstrating a number of other skills related to, and other competencies related to level B1. So this document, scope and sequence, which you can access from the resources library, can be used as the points in the criteria for you to assess And when you download the pack for the practice tests, the mock test, it comes with a list of samples and samples with comments, which will give you an idea of which sample would be getting more, better, or lower grades, right? Higher or lower grades in terms of performance. So one way of working with writing skills is this sequence of activities, which we call process writing, which is an approach to teaching writing, and it allows the teacher and the students to go through a number of phases, right? They go through a process of producing a text together. And here is a link of a brief description of process writing and its stages, right? So basically, process writing has three main phases. Pre-writing phase, starting with a number of activities such as brainstorming, planning what to write, organizing, and then selecting ideas. And that can be done in groups if you are teaching remotely and your platform has access to collaborative tasks like Google Docs. Students can do that remotely, working as a group. And then we have the writing and revising phase, where the teacher gives feedback on the student's first draft or initial production. Learners can exchange draft and reorganize ideas. If they're working remotely, they can already do this all together in the collaborative file. Then they can add and change and remove parts of the text, check language by changing words and expressions, until they come to the editing phase, where they will be checking punctuation, spelling, grammatical inaccuracies, proofreading, and then they are ready to publish the final version. Publish here, I'll mention in inverted commas. This is the moment when they submit the final version to the teacher, or this is the final version of something they will be presenting, and so on. So those two phases here, of course, we can see them here as three phases, but the process from pre-writing to editing to publishing the final version, we have lots of gray areas, right? But it's in those two phases here that we have a lot of formative assessment, because students will be producing, getting feedback, improving, etc. So there's lots of formative assessment, helping the students to develop the competencies and do well in the exam. So,
Alberto, sorry to interrupt you, but can you explain why you have revising closer to writing and not to editing? There was a comment about that from one of the participants in the webinar.
That's a very good question. And that somehow aligns with this comment that I made, the gray areas. Usually we have writing and revising, because writing is about drafting and then redrafting, and editing is when you already have a somehow nearly finished version, and then you edit for very specific details, proofreading, etc. To give you an analogy, it's like writing a dissertation, right? You don't sit and write a dissertation at one go. It starts like years or months before you submit the final version to your tutor. It comes and goes many times. That's writing, revising, writing, revising. When you have it almost complete, there's this final editing to, so you can
format, punctuation.
The protocols for punctuation, format, etc. Right. So I hope this helps us understand why writing, revising is close together, right? So any kind of writing task can be used when we talk about process writing. You can go through phases. Here is the first part one of the writing paper. You can go through the phases to help students write a story in the classroom. And then that's the same for part two. You can start asking for ideas, putting ideas together, making lists, and then creating short sentences until they put a paragraph together. Same for part 3. So students can start by brainstorming, generating ideas, then they draft the paragraphs. The teacher gives feedback, or there is peer feedback, they revise until they come to the editing phase, and then they submit the final version, right? And just to give you an example of how it could happen in the classroom, I'm going to illustrate how that can work with this task here, um, um, writing a story from pictures. So what we can do is in the pre-writing phase, we can brainstorming ideas by looking at the images, objects, furniture, location, relationship between the people in the images, the activities involved, the actions. Then we can plan and organize a sequence of events. What happened first, second, start putting the ideas together. Then we have the writing revising phase. The teacher can give feedback on the sequencing of ideas, on the language. Students could do this collaboratively in pair or groups or in breakout rooms. In the case of remote teaching, then they reorganize the ideas, and then they go to the editing phase to check punctuation, spelling, redrafting, peer editing, and then they submit the final version. So that's one way, right? And when I mentioned here circle writing, which is something that I love doing in the face-to-face classroom, but in the remote classroom, a collaborative document could replace the circle writing phase, right? And of course, when we're talking about process writing, we need to think of the feedback that we give students during the process and the criteria. So the points that are taken into consideration in the criteria for MET Go Digital, the writing paper is you have things like task completion, cohesion, grammar, vocabulary, mechanics, punctuation, etc. So there are many things to consider. And here on the right, I have a diagram just to remind you of the different levels that are associated with the different parts. So part 1, story through pictures, descriptors from levels A1 and A2. Part 2, descriptors from level A2 and B1. Part 3, descriptors from level B1. And by looking at the 3 tasks together, you can have a better profile of the candidates' competencies for the exam, right? So the other thing, since we're talking about mixed ability classes, while we are doing this in the classroom, we might need to differentiate the kinds of tasks for specific groups of learners. And here I have some ideas for differentiation. For example, before they write the story, they could list the vocabulary in each picture to give them support, scaffolding for writing sentences. They could, for example, categorize language that they see in the 3 pictures, like nouns, verbs, adjectives in different columns. They could read a story based on the pictures and write a similar story with the support of the cues here. This is one possibility, or just write a story by looking at the pictures because you feel students are ready to go to that phase immediately. And this is actually what happens in the exam. On the exam day, they have to do that, look at the images and write the story, right? Now we have the speaking skills, Fernando. So that's all.
Yeah, before we jump into the next one and to wrap up the writing section, I was wondering how many of you, if you can tell us in the chat, include kind of writing activities based on a sequence of pictures like this one. Have you done this type of activity? Is this something that you normally do at these levels with your teenage students? Is it something that frequently appears, something that you see easily doing in class with them, or it's something that the students would not be used to that? You can tell us a few ideas about that. How familiar your students might be with writing, like following that kind of sequence of pictures to tell a short story. Delma used it once. such activities, speaking test and step ahead. Okay, easy to do, very familiar.
Yeah.
Or students propose them. Yeah, that's a great idea. Students can propose that, kind of find something to follow. Great. So to finish with the speaking section, again, students enjoy them very much. They've used them. Carolina says that she has used those several times.
That's great.
That's the idea behind many of these, kind of using tasks that are familiar to students and that can consider those different levels of English proficiency. So the speaking section has 4 parts. 3 of those are rated. The first one is a warm-up that is not rated, and it's to get students acquainted with the examiner if it's a face-to-face class, or with the platform if they're responding during the digital exam. You can see the different skills that the test is. The speaking test will assess conveying information about a picture using general vocabulary. There's a lot of kind of visual context and visual imagery to help students contextualize the ideas for the whole test. Describing a picture and narrate a sequence of events, talking about personal experiences and personal preferences, and providing details, explaining, supporting their opinions or preferences. So we'll look at a few of the sections and how they are linked throughout the test. But again, I'm sure that all of you use comparison of different pictures and describing a picture to give them opportunities to improve their oral proficiency, to practice speaking skills, or talking about personal experiences and opinions. I'm sure teenagers have a lot of opinions that they want to share, and they find one way or another to really express those. So again, these are very familiar tasks, and the kind of the expectations in terms of language proficiency and the development that they were evaluating in this case is very common for this particular level of students, for their age group and for the type of classes that we're working with. So if we go on with the next one, the first part, students will see this. It's basically a few simple questions. This section is not scored. It's mainly to provide kind of a warm-up, like what we would do normally in a class. It's about 1 minute that they will have for this. And they have a few questions that they either respond to the examiner, if it's a paper-based exam that is administered in person with a certified speaking examiner, or online, they will do it responding to the computer, and they will record their response on the computer when they're ready for this section. And there are simple questions like, what is your name? How is the weather today? Tell me about your family, or something to get the students at ease with this kind of interaction. The next activity for part 2, it's a picture comparison. They have 2 very similar pictures with several differences, and they have to identify the similarities and differences between the 2 pictures. In this case, they will have 90 seconds to provide their responses, and you can read the instructions that they will read in that case. Many things are the same, but some things are different. For example, there are some examples that are mentioned there. So what else is different? Say as much as you can. So you can easily see what is different, what is not. The context is kind of very familiar. The vocabulary that they would have to use is very typical for these levels. In particular, it's not anything that will be very complex. The situation that is depicted here is very common, again, for these levels of English proficiency and for the students themselves, for their age groups. We won't practice this activity with you today, but we have a few other activities that we can illustrate using these, the idea of this activity for kind of teaching, learning purposes, and to practice and get them acquainted with the type of activity in the test, but mainly when they're developing skills and when they're becoming more confident with the type of task in class. We can move on to the next one. Suppose you can start with just one picture and kind of start analyzing what they see in the picture. You can give them a chart to give them some help in some way, or you can just ask them to write words describing what happened, just words, like ideas. Or it could be nouns and adjectives, like they can find what can they see blue and red, and they write the noun that corresponds to that. Or what adjectives describe the building? Or there's a store there. What would you say to describe the store? So that gives them that kind of, they start becoming more familiar with the language that they will need to use in order to describe. They get more time to think about the context, that situation in particular. You can do kind of a pair activity, one student with picture A, another student with picture B. They only see one of the pictures in that case. They don't see both, but for that other section, you would have to use both pictures. And some kind of guides to give them. Oh no, sorry, I'm confused with this one. They only, one of the students is looking at the picture in this case, and the other one doesn't have a picture at all. One of the students is describing what they see in the picture, and then the other one will draw what he hears from the other student, and then they can compare those with some help with that kind of language that you have here. The other possibilities we're comparing pictures separately, and we'll see that in a minute. But those are beginning possibility of activities that you can use at the beginning of your lesson plan to get them more acquainted with those descriptions and to get them to develop the linguistic knowledge to be able to, the words, the adjectives, the nouns, the expressions that they might need to use to describe those pictures. So they will feel more comfortable, integrating listening and speaking as well, as Riaz is saying. Giving them more confidence with the description itself, they will have access to a lot more language in that case that they would by themselves. If we move on to the next one, with these two, you can also give them different similarity, some language to help them describe similarities first, ask them to talk about differences later, with some kind of guide that can help them feel more confident about what they were going to be using. There are, how do you describe pictures, or how do you describe what you find in those two pictures? Give them some language that they can use so that they can feel more comfortable with that. Or they can do it separately, as I was telling you earlier. Only one is looking at one picture and the other one is looking at the other one, and they have to, if they are kind of probably at a higher level in a way, and they have more language to be able to do that by themselves, they can just try to identify differences between the two pictures without only seeing one of them. And that can be more fun and more challenging in a way. You can have a game deciding, trying to see how many differences they can find and who wins and what they win, basically. The next section is a description based on another picture description based on this image in particular, which shows some kind of setting, something is going on, and they have to just kind of tell a story based on what they see here. They have like the instructions, tell me what you see in the picture and tell me a story about it, say as much as you can. These are the standard instructions that they will see for that particular test. So what do you think? What would you talk about in this case? If you were taking the test, what is the story? What is happening? Can you write a few comments about what you see going on here before we start with with a few other ideas? Write some comments in the chat and see what kind of story we have.
You can see spring cleaning here.
Household chores, right? Good. Is this context, this situation, is this similar to what might be happening at home? What about you, Alberto? Do you see yourself in that picture in a way? Daily activities?
Early morning. End of the day as well.
Family cleaning home on Sunday. Yeah, you get the picture. So you know how students might relate to something like this based on their age group, their experiences at home. So if we move on to
I'm the one doing the dishes. I prefer cleaning to cooking.
If we go on to the next slide, we have that particular activity here mapped out against the three levels that the exam is aiming at. We have another one. It's weekend, all the families at home doing some chores, right? So we have that task mapped against the different levels and can-do statements for each of those A1, A2, and B1 levels. So you can see, if you're looking at evaluating your curriculum, you can see where in your, throughout the academic program, where you're practicing those skills, where students are expected to produce isolated phrases or giving a story, describing an object, using either basic words or using more elaborate language, as in the other case, kind of reasonably, as in the B1 description, and fluently sustaining a straightforward description of one of a variety of subjects within their field of interest, presenting that in a linear sequence of points while they're talking in a way. So this is an easy, an appropriate task, not easy necessarily, but it's a very carefully developed, designed task in order to elicit that kind of variety of language from A1 up to B1 levels, and making sure that students will feel comfortable describing it and creating something based on that particular visual context. So if you can continue, some guided tasks that we could use to help students working on that practice and becoming more familiar with the task when they're working in class. Just start just describing 5 things that you see in the picture, not necessarily connecting the ideas, but they can just start with some observations, or then a few kind of general guiding questions. How many people are there in the picture? Who are they? Where are they? So they can identify it's the kitchen, they're at home, it's the family, who they think they might be, think about their names, or you can start helping them think about that particular context and feel as they are part of that. And the last one in this case, a few more questions to help them organize that story. So what do you think that they're doing? What is happening? What will happen next? Which might not be necessarily here, but they can see something that needs to happen right away. So those are some suggestions to use some of the content, the activities, the input from the exam, the visuals, or the tasks that are presented there, and seeing how you can integrate them into your curriculum, because I'm sure that you have lots of pictures like this one that you can use and that you already use for oral practice. We move on to the next slide for part 4, when they talk about their personal experience. They have to talk about a specific topic or setting. And in this case, tell me about a time in the past when you had to clean or wash something in your home. So this is also related to the previous task. In a way, the previous task prepared them for this one. It's kind of activating that kind of background knowledge. They're already in that context. And part 4, which is a little more challenging, and they have to talk about their own personal experience in this case, with a little more information. They will have 10 seconds to plan for that, and then they have 60 seconds to talk about it. You can see the expectations in terms of those can-do statements. The students are expected to be able to tell a story, describe something in a simple way, giving a short, basic description of events and activities. It's not going to be a very complex task, but it has to be well organized. They need to plan about it in a limited, but it follows the same, it's based on the same context that they started before. So it's kind of a continuation in a way within your lesson plan at a slightly higher stage. I'm sure that, again, you have many opportunities throughout your lesson plan for one day. I'm sure that almost every class you will have a chance to do something like this, to practice speaking in this way. talking about daily activities, talking about hobbies or interests, talking about likes or dislikes, describing what you did last weekend, or talking about a favorite vacation. Sure that practically almost every lesson you would have something related to a picture or something that could generate this kind of practice in 1 minute, because you see that this task is only for 60 seconds. It's not going to take a lot of time, but you can use many of the materials that you already have to easily help students prepare and be more aware that they are also developing, not only practicing those skills, but also becoming more confident with the kind of tasks that they might encounter on the exam. And for the last section, expressing an opinion, the speaking part 4, it's also related to the same context. You see the example here is some people enjoy cleaning and organizing their homes. Other people think cleaning is boring and don't like to do it. How do you feel about cleaning? I'm sure teenagers will have a lot of opinions about this. And I know my 2 sons' opinions, they are very different about their attitudes related to cleaning. But again, it's still contextualized within the same idea, general idea. It's going a little bit further in this case because I have to express and support an opinion. You see the can-do statements that are describing what is expected from students in this case, and a few other comments from the many opportunities that you might encounter in your class, in your textbooks, in the materials that you're already using throughout your academic program. There are always opportunities for them to explain preferences, to describe why they like, for example, a sport or a hobby, or making suggestions to improve the school and how they support that kind of recommendation or idea. Provide 3 reasons, or all the textbooks and all the materials that you're using will always encourage students to express opinions and explain why they support one idea or another. So if we continue with the next one, most of the things that we were talking about all the 4 skills show examples of how easily it is to MET-Go can be integrated into the curriculum in different ways. All the familiar and relevant topics that are used for this kind of teenage 11 to 15-year-old, 10 to 15-year-old student population. It's the content, the topics, the tasks, the contexts are mainly designed considering that age group and how they learn at this particular stage in their lives. All the tasks are contextualized and integrated, as you saw, like this example of a speaking task, or the other ones from writing that Alberto was talking about. The grammar and vocabulary items are also grouped under thematic units so that they are also focused on a certain area and they don't have to think about completely different topics or contexts when they are answering different items related mainly to grammar and vocabulary. All the tasks are tasks that they can complete in class on a regular basis, and they're all appropriate for these kind of varying levels of different proficiency levels of English that we see in many of our classes as well. And that kind of the same activity usually enables different students with different levels of proficiency to show their performance, the level of achievement that they have by then, and feeling confident about what they can do where they are today, and not necessarily feeling frustrated because they didn't reach a certain expectation. And kind of a key factor for me is how the activities promote further learning, not only providing opportunities for all students, and why this is a kind of more inclusive exam, but the score report that they get, the personalized feedback that they get on the back of the report that helps students know what else to do. This is very specific to this particular exam, and it's the result of analyzing all the pattern of responses for each of the different skills. Speaking and writing are not just rated on a holistic scale. They're based on a long checklist with many items. All these different features are present or not in that particular written sample or oral performance sample. So raters, if they check off all of those, they each of those areas that we're evaluating for that particular written or oral sample will give us information that we can use for these individualized reports to give students feedback on their specific level of performance when they took the test. So that's a really strong component of the exam that is very user-friendly, but it provides a lot of information to help students to continue learning. And this information also helps teachers to keep improving the curriculum as well, to know how the students are performing and what areas they're doing well on and which ones they need to still work on, with some specific recommendations that they get on the score report as well. So I think, we have a few more things, mainly all the kind of different resources that we have available on the website. CJ already shared part of that on the chat. You can find on michiganassessment.org a growing list of resources of different kinds. You can see, if you move on to the next one, Alberto, there are videos, there are webinars, there are materials, worksheets for teachers, information for parents, information for students, test takers, for schools, and a lot for teachers themselves. There is more information now on the MET Go, the digital version of MET Go, and a full sample test with so that students can follow the different sections and know the experience as a test taker when they're taking the digital version of the test. And there it is again. Yeah, we talked about this one. And if you go, I think there's only one left at this point. Right, so we're at the end of a session at this point. We hope that MET Go can be a good solution for your school. You can post some comments to the chat if you think that this is any comments about the activities or ideas or suggestions that we shared about the different sections on how to work on different skill areas and how to integrate the exam experience with the daily lesson plan and the daily learning that takes place in your classes, either face-to-face or online. If you have any questions, you can post them on the Q&A section. We can do.
We have some questions, Fernando, here.
I see one that CJ posted from Facebook about spelling. Yeah, students can use any standard spelling and they are not really penalized if they use British or a different kind of expressing the idea, as long as it's properly done in standard English in some way. So that's not affecting, or when they're speaking as well with pronunciation or their accent, it's not going to affect the rating. The speaking is rated by human raters, so people will be, as long as it's comprehensible, it doesn't matter how it's how they're communicating. The most important parts are the ideas that they're expressing and how they're communicating them. Not there isn't a strong focus on that particular accent. What else? There were a few more questions. Very good solution, interesting and nice test for students.
There's something about the recording of the speaking test, Fernando. Is the whole speaking test through recording only?
The speaking test is audio recorded only, not video. It's only we only capture in the digital test. In this case, the other tests are recorded for quality control purposes. But on the digital administration at home, it's only an audio file that is recorded for the student, and that comes to us through the platform directly for rating, so that results can be ready on time. Very useful, great options for your students, a good solution, whole speaking test recording only. The face-to-face speaking test is with an examiner, and would happen face-to-face in that case. So if the students take an an exam in person at a test center, at one of our authorized test centers, they would do that with a speaking examiner that has been certified to do that. When they do it digitally, when they take it at home, or when they take it at a test center, but the digital version of the test, they will complete the speaking test on the computer and recording it as an audio file. To issue a certificate of attendance at Cambridge University and Macmillan.
We have some suggestions from Riaz. We are going to take these feedback on board, Riaz. Thank you very much. Suggesting that we issue a certificate of attendance and using breakout rooms. Two very good points. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. Any
other comments that you want to make, Alberto?
A lot of people are saying that yes, they think it is a solution. It's they say it's a good option and it's very practical as well. A lot of people relate to the tasks in the exam because it's similar to other popular exams, but exams that are for a different kind of audience, for example, adult learners. So yes, they think it is a solution, Fernando, which is good.
Since then, webinar practical activities. Great, thank you, Delma, for your feedback. There was a question about the cost of the test. That's something you would discuss with your test centers, and the different options, or which exam is the kind of a more appropriate for your particular context. So feel free to contact centers directly to learn about that, or the Michigan or Cambridge rep that works with you directly, so that you can have direct information from them. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the evening or morning, depending on where you are. CJ, thanks for organizing all this. And Alberto, it's been a pleasure to work with you on this session.
Same here, Fernando. Thank you very much to you, to Michigan, to CJ for all the support. It's been a pleasure as well. And it's something I think that can be a solution for many different situations. And it's nice to see the feedback here in the chat. Thank you very much.
Great. So stay safe, everybody. I hope to hear from you soon. And you have our contact information. So have a great evening and a great year.
Yeah. Stay safe, everyone. And thank you very much for attending and for staying with us for this hour.
Bye-bye. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.